Her family forced her to wed her sister's billionaire fiancé in a coma, but fate had other plans. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. A gray drizzle painted the glass walls of Street Ridge's private hospital in Manhattan. Inside a quiet boardroom, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. Lila Tran sat stiffly at the long mahogany table, her fingers twisting the hem of her worn cardigan. Across from her, Margaret Rhodes, elegant in pearls and calm authority, placed a thin folder on the polished surface. Sign this. Miss Tran. Margaret said, her tone soft but absolute. It is the only way to protect your sister's reputation and the Cole family's name. The fluorescent light hummed above them as Lila's eyes fell on the document. Marriage agreement. Her throat tightened. You want me to marry Ethan, she whispered, voice trembling. My sister's fiancée Margaret folded her hands neatly. Ethan is in a coma. The wedding was already announced, the press is circling like vultures, and investors are getting nervous. Your signature keeps the family's shares stable. Think of it as a contract, not a love story. Outside thunder rolled over the city. Inside time seemed to stop. Lila thought of her mother's hospital bills piling up, the eviction notice taped to her art therapy studio's door, and her father's trembling voice when he said, "Please just keep our family safe." Her hand shook as she reached for the pen. If I do this, she said quietly, it will not be for your reputation, Mrs. Rhodes. It will be because my family cannot take another loss. The pen scratched the paper. Her name, Lila Tran, became the newest link in a chain she never wanted. That evening, under a gray Manhattan sky, she entered Ethan Rhodes' private suite for the first time. The room was silent, except for the steady beep of machines. Ethan lay motionless beneath crisp white sheets, his face pale but strangely peaceful. Lila stepped closer, heart pounding. I guess this makes us husband and wife, she murmured half to herself. You do not know me, and I barely know you, but I will do my best. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the window beside his bed. Outside rain streaked the glass like quiet tears. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead before setting down a small sketchbook on the bedside table. It was the same one she used for her patients, the same one she believed could help people heal when words failed. Maybe I can help you too, she said softly. Even if you cannot hear me. The monitor beeped steadily, answering her with silence. Lila exhaled and sat down beside him, opening the sketchbook to a blank page. Her pencil moved slowly, tracing the outline of his hand, the strong lines of a man who once ruled boardrooms and built empires, now utterly still. In that moment, she made herself a quiet promise. She would not treat this marriage as a lie. She would turn it into something human, something real, even if Ethan never woke up to see it. And as the storm raged outside, the faintest flicker of movement passed through Ethan's fingertips. But Lila did not see it. She only kept drawing, unaware that fate had already begun to rewrite their story. The following morning, soft sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Ethan Rhodes' private suite. The storm had passed, leaving streaks of gold across the white walls. Lila sat by the bed, her sketchbook resting on her knees. She had barely slept. The reality of what she had done, the signature, the ceremony, the strange title of Mrs. Rhodes settled on her like invisible weight. The nurse entered quietly to check the machines. His vitals are stable, she said kindly. You are welcome to stay as long as you need Mrs. Rhodes. The title sounded foreign. Lila nodded, murmuring a quiet thank you before turning back to Ethan. His face looked peaceful, his dark hair slightly tousled against the pillow. Without the tubes and machines, he could have been simply sleeping. Good morning, she said softly, her voice barely louder than the hum of the heart monitor. It is strange saying that to someone who cannot answer, but I will keep doing it anyway. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw his hand again, carefully shading the outline of his fingers. As her pencil moved, she started talking as if her words could fill the silence that surrounded him. I used to believe art was only about beauty, she said, but it is really about patience. You keep showing up even when you are not sure the picture will ever be finished. Each day became a rhythm. Mornings spent at the hospital, afternoons at her small apartment where she mixed paints to afford her mother's treatments, evenings returning to Ethan's side. She wiped the dust from the window ledge, replaced the flowers, and talked about her day as if they were friends sharing dinner. One afternoon, she told him about her art therapy group at the community center. There was this little boy who drew a house with no doors, she said, tracing lines in the air. When I asked him why, he said, so nobody can leave me again. Maybe we all draw our fears without realizing it. The monitor continued its slow, steady rhythm. Outside the Hamptons mansion was preparing for a charity gala, one of the 5 social events required in the contract. Margaret reminded Lila that she would need to attend as Ethan's wife to represent the family. It will be brief, Margaret said in her usual measured tone. Smile, stand beside him, and say nothing unnecessary. The media will be watching. That night, Lila stood before a mirror in the guest room, adjusting a simple navy dress that Ava had helped her pick. It was not designer, but it fit her well. She tied her hair back, applied a touch of color to her lips, and practiced breathing. Just survive the evening, she whispered. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne. Every guest looked polished, confident, and cold. Cameras flashed as Lila walked in her steps, measured and careful. She could feel the weight of the crowd's curiosity. Whispers followed her like shadows. That is her, someone said. The woman who married him while he was in a coma. Lila's cheeks flushed, but she kept her chin high. She stopped beside Ethan's framed portrait near the stage. The photograph showed him alive, strong eyes, sharp with ambition. Standing there, she suddenly understood the distance between the man in that picture and the one sleeping upstairs. When the reporter pushed forward with the microphone, Lila's stomach twisted. Mrs. Rose, the woman said loudly, many people believe this marriage was arranged for money or control. Do you have anything to say about that? Margaret stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Lila lifted her hand slightly. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. Families are not built on perfection or photographs, she said. Sometimes they are built on promises, on caring for someone, even when they cannot care for you. That is what love looks like, even if the world refuses to understand it. For a moment, silence swept through the room, then a few soft claps turned into a gentle wave of applause. The reporter lowered her microphone, caught off guard. Later that night, after the gala, Lila returned to the hospital, still wearing the dress. The city lights flickered outside as she sat beside Ethan again. I think I made a mess of my first public appearance, she said, with a small laugh. But at least I told the truth. Her hand brushed his. The monitor's rhythm shifted for a heartbeat, just a fraction faster, then back to normal. Lila froze, eyes wide. Ethan, she whispered, nothing. Only the steady beep filling the silence again. Maybe it was her imagination. Still, she smiled faintly. If you can hear me, she said, just know that I am trying to keep my promise. The night nurse peeked in, saw her sketching again, and smiled quietly before closing the door. Outside snow began to fall over the city, and somewhere between the faint hum of the machines and the rustle of graphite on paper, Ethan's fingers moved so slightly that only the camera above the bed would later record it. But for now, Lila simply kept drawing her pencil, following the rhythm of his heartbeat, unaware that hope had already started to breathe again. The following days unfolded like pages from the same quiet routine. Every morning, Lila arrived at Ethan's room before sunrise. She opened the curtains just enough for the golden light to touch. His face wiped the glass of condensation and spoke softly as if he were simply resting. The nurses had grown used to her presence. Some even left small notes of encouragement on the bedside table. Doctor, Caleb Harris observed from the doorway one morning watching Lila adjust the blanket over Ethan's chest. You have been coming every day, he said. Most people would have given up by now. Lila smiled faintly without turning around. I do not think healing happens when you give up, doctor. Even if he cannot respond, I believe he knows I am here. Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. It is unusual, but I will not stop you. Just remember to rest. When he left, Lila placed her sketchbook on her lap again. This time, she drew not his hand, but the reflection of both of them in the window, the fragile line between the living and the sleeping. She did not notice that Ethan's eyelids fluttered ever so slightly as if his mind were trying to reach the sound of her pencil. That afternoon, Margaret Rose summoned her to the mansion. The older woman stood near the grand piano, her posture as polished as her pearls. You have been spending a great deal of time at the hospital, she said evenly. It was not part of the contract to linger. Lila clasped her hands. I am not interfering with his care. I am simply being present. Margaret's gaze hardened. Do not confuse sentiment with responsibility. Ethan is not your charity project. He is my son and the future of this company. Lila met her eyes for the first time. Then, maybe he deserves more than a family that treats him like an investment. The words hung heavy in the air. Margaret's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Later that night, Lila returned to the hospital, her emotions a storm beneath her calm exterior. She sat beside Ethan's bed, tracing the faint scar near his temple with her eyes. They think you are only a name on documents, she whispered. But I know there is more. You built everything with your own hands, and I know those hands can move again. The heart monitor pulsed steadily, and she sighed. I am sorry. I am talking too much again. She reached for her bag to leave, but then it happened a flicker. The faintest movement of his fingers. Lila froze. Ethan, she breathed, leaning closer. His hand twitched once more subtle but real. She pressed the call button in disbelief. Dr. Harris entered moments later, checking the monitors. What did you see? His hand moved, Lila said, voice shaking. I swear it did. The doctor studied the readings, brows furrowed. There's a slight change in neuroactivity. It might be reflex, but we will monitor him closely. Do not get your hopes too high yet. After he left, Lila sank back into the chair, her pulse racing. I knew it, she whispered. You are still fighting. From that day, her routine changed. She brought small speakers to play the gentle piano music Ethan once loved. She read aloud from art books, shared stories about her patients, and even told him about her childhood dream of opening a studio by the sea. The sterile room began to feel warmer, filled with her voice and quiet sketches taped along the wall. One evening, Ava came to visit carrying coffee. You look like you have not seen sunlight in a week, she teased. Lila smiled tiredly. He moved Ava. Twice. Dr. Harris says it might be reflex, but I think it means something. Ava looked at the sketches pinned beside the bed, dozens of hands, heartbeats, and faint pencil strokes forming waves. Then keep doing what you are doing, she said. If kindness could wake someone, he would have opened his eyes days ago. When Ava left, Lila stayed behind, resting her head on the edge of the bed. Do you know what they say about you, Ethan? She murmured. That you were ruthless. That you never smiled. But maybe you were just tired of people wanting something from you. Outside rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the glass. Inside her words hung in the dim light like a prayer. She lifted her head, opened her sketchbook, and wrote beneath the newest drawing. Patience is a form of love. The monitor beeped once, then steadied. The movement returned his hand slightly stronger this time. Her heart stopped. Ethan, she whispered again. Dr. Harris entered just in time to see the subtle tremor ripple through Ethan's arm. Well, he said, slowly, almost smiling, perhaps you were right, Mrs. Rose. Perhaps he does know you are here. Tears welled in Lila's eyes, but she kept her composure. Then I will keep talking, she said softly, until he answers me himself. As the doctor left, the light in the room dimmed to a warm amber glow. Lila leaned back in her chair, whispering one last time before closing her eyes. Good night, Ethan. You did well today. The machines hummed their steady lullaby, and outside dawn was only a few hours away. Something unseen had shifted in the silence, a small, undeniable pulse of hope waiting to awaken. Days passed, and the whispers in the hospital grew louder. Word had spread that Ethan Rose, the billionaire in a coma, had shown signs of movement. The staff exchanged cautious glances, reporters called for updates, and investors watched from a distance. But inside that quiet suite, none of it mattered. Lila was too focused on him. Each morning she arrived with a new sketch and the same soft greeting. Good morning, Ethan. It is a beautiful day, and I brought you another song. Her voice filled the sterile room with a warmth it had never known. She played the piano piece through a small speaker and began drawing again, her hands steady despite the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Dr. Caleb Harris documented every change carefully. His brain activity has increased by 20%, he told Lila during one of his rounds. There is a clear response to sound. I cannot explain it completely, but it began around the same time you started the music sessions. Lila smiled faintly. Maybe he is listening after all. At the mention, however, Margaret Rose was not smiling. She paced the marble hall phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I am aware of the improvement, she said sharply. But this woman is overstepping her place. She is not a doctor. She is his wife only on paper. That evening, Lila returned home to find a notice slipped under her door, an official letter from Margaret's attorney. All art therapy sessions with Ethan Rose are to be discontinued immediately. The next day, she stood outside the hospital room, the letter trembling in her hand. "They're trying to keep me away," she told Ava quietly. Ava frowned. "She is afraid you are changing him, Lila. Maybe she is afraid he will wake up and choose his own path." Lila took a deep breath and walked in anyway. Ethan's eyes remained closed, but his presence felt stronger, more alive. She sat beside him and placed her hand over his. "I do not know if you can hear me, Ethan, but they want me to stop coming. They think what I do does not matter. If you can fight even just a little, please show them it does." Hours later, while she was sketching, the heart monitor suddenly spiked. The doctor and nurses rushed in as the reading stabilized. "This is no reflex," Dr. Harris murmured. He responded to her voice. But Margaret was already on her way. She stormed into the hospital the next morning, her heels clicking against the tile like gunfire. "This nonsense ends today," she declared, thrusting a folder toward Dr. Harris. "Effective immediately, the art sessions are over. Mrs. Rose has violated Clause 3 of the contract." Lila stood her ground. "You can take your contract," she said quietly, "but you cannot stop what has already begun." Margaret's eyes flashed. "Do you think love will wake him? This is business, not a fairy tale." Lila's reply was calm. "Maybe that is a problem. You have forgotten that he is more than business." Security escorted her out before she could say more. That night, the hospital room was silent again, but something felt missing, like air had gone stale. Ethan's fingers did not twitch. The machines hummed, but there was no response. For the first time in weeks, Lila's chair sat empty beside his bed. Ava visited her later, finding her sitting alone in her tiny apartment, surrounded by unfinished sketches. "You cannot give up now," Ava urged. "He needs you." Lila looked down at her hands stained with graphite. "They took away my access. The contract was all I had left to stay near him." "Then find another way," Ava said. "Not through them, but through what you do best. Show the world what you have been doing in that room." The next morning, Lila carried a single box of drawings to the hospital's community hall. She asked Dr. Harris for one favor. "Let me host an open workshop. Not for Ethan, not for the Rose family. For anyone who believes art can heal." He hesitated, then nodded. "I will make it happen." By noon, the hall was filled with patients, nurses, and visitors holding pencils and brushes. Lila stood in front of them, her voice steady. "Today we are not painting perfection. We are drawing breath one line for every heartbeat we still believe in." Among the quiet strokes of color and the soft music playing from her speaker, something changed upstairs. The monitor in Ethan's room flickered again, his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the song. Dr. Harris ran down the hall almost breathless. "Lila," he called, "he is responding again. The readings are up." Tears blurred her vision as she smiled. Then let it play louder. Back in the suite, Ethan's hand moved once more, this time with clear intention. His fingers closed slightly as if searching for something that was no longer beside him. The news spread quickly. "Billionaire in coma shows remarkable response to music therapy." Margaret's face appeared on the screen during a press interview, but for the first time her voice trembled. Perhaps my son is stronger than I realized." That night, Lila stood outside the hospital looking up at the window of Ethan's room, glowing faintly against the dark sky. She whispered, "I will find my way back to you, Ethan. No contract can stop that." And somewhere inside, behind the glass and the machines, a man who had not opened his eyes in months began to dream for the first time in a long while. The next morning, the city awoke to headlines that made everyone pause. The woman who painted phale and artist's care brought a comatose billionaire back to life. News outlets called it the Rose Miracle, but Lila wanted no part of the attention. She only wanted to see him again. Dr. Harris arranged it quietly. Late in the evening, when the reporters had gone and Margaret was attending a charity dinner, he led Lila through the side corridor to Ethan's suite. 5 minutes, he said. No cameras, no contracts, just you and him. The room felt different now. The machines were quieter, the air warmer. Ethan still slept, but his breathing was deeper, steadier. Lila approached the bed, her heart thundering. "Ethan," she whispered, "I am back." She placed her sketchbook beside him and opened it to a blank page. Her pencil moved with calm certainty, drawing the outline of his face, the same face she had memorized for months. As she worked, she spoke softly. "They said it was impossible, but I knew you were listening. I saw your hand move. I felt it." A sudden flutter broke the rhythm. His eyes moved beneath closed lids. The pencil slipped from her fingers. She leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "Ethan," his eyelids trembled again. Then slowly, painfully, they opened. His eyes were unfocused at first, searching for something real in the blur of light. When his gaze finally found her, it stopped. Lila froze, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "You are awake," she said, her voice shaking. "You came back." His lips parted, dry and uncertain. "Who are you?" She laughed through her tears. "I am your wife, apparently. Long story." He blinked, confused, the faintest trace of a smile forming. "You were here," he whispered. "I remember the music. And your voice." Lila nodded. "You remember something." Everything felt dark, he said, slowly, words fragile like glass. "Then someone kept talking to me. You would not stop. I wanted to follow that sound." Her chest tightened. "Then I am glad I never stopped." When Dr. Harris entered moments later, the look on his face said everything. "Mr. Rose," he breathed, "welcome back." The next few days became a blur of recovery. The world outside exploded with news and speculation, but inside the hospital, everything was quiet, almost sacred. Lila stayed by his side through every test and therapy session, her presence as constant as the light through the window. Ethan's strength returned slowly, but his questions about her grew with every passing hour. "You married me while I was in a coma," he said one morning teasingly. "That is quite a bold move." She smiled shyly. "Technically, it was your family's idea. I just agreed." "And you stayed?" "Yes," she said simply, "because someone had to believe you would come back." One afternoon, Margaret appeared at the door, her eyes tired but softer than before. She looked at her son, now sitting upright, his hand wrapped around Lila's. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "You gave him what I could not face." Lila stood to leave, but Ethan stopped her. "Stay," he said firmly. "If she had not believed in me, I might never have found my way back." Margaret nodded slowly, the sharpness in her voice gone. "Then I suppose this family has a new beginning to make." Weeks later, Ethan was discharged. The mansion felt different when he returned. Less like a monument, more like a home. He asked Lila to walk with him through the garden, the winter air crisp and clear. "Do you remember that day you first came into my room?" he asked. "I do," she said softly. "It was raining. I almost walked away." "I am glad you did not." He stopped near the fountain, took her hands in his. "The world thinks this was a miracle, but I know it was you." He reached into his pocket and revealed a small box. Inside was a simple gold ring. "We started as a contract, but I do not want to end that way." "Lila Tran, will you marry me for real this time?" Her breath caught. She nodded, laughing and crying all at once. "Yes," she whispered, "for real." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, snow began to fall over the garden, melting against their hands. For the first time in a long while, everything felt still. No contracts, no conditions, only the quiet truth between them. And somewhere inside the heart of the man who once built Empire's love had found its way home. The news of Ethan Rose's recovery spread faster than anyone could control. Cameras crowded the gates of the Hamptons mansion, eager to capture the first glimpse of the billionaire who had defied medical odds. But behind those closed gates, life for Ethan and Lila was quiet, almost fragile. They were both learning how to exist outside of the hospital walls, how to live without machines dictating the rhythm of their days. Ethan spent most mornings walking through the garden with a cane, his steps uncertain but determined. Lila often walked beside him, carrying a thermos of tea and her sketchbook. "You move faster every day," she said one morning, smiling. "I have a good reason to," he replied, glancing at her with quiet affection. "I am trying to catch up to all the time I lost." In the afternoons, while Ethan attended therapy sessions, Lila turned one of the empty guest rooms into an art studio. She covered the walls with her sketches from the hospital, the outlines of hands, faces, and heartbeats. When Ethan saw them for the first time, he stood in silence for a long moment. "You drew hope into this house," he said softly. "It used to feel so cold." But their peace did not last long. Margaret called a board meeting for the family's foundation, inviting investors and the press. The official reason was to celebrate Ethan's return. The unspoken reason was control. "They will expect you to speak," she reminded him that morning. "They will expect the same man who left strong, strategic, unshakable." Ethan looked across the room at Lila. That man does not exist anymore. The ballroom was glittering again, just like the night Lila had faced the reporters alone. Only this time she stood beside Ethan in the open, no longer hidden behind any contract. As cameras flashed, Ethan took her hand. "Before we begin," he said to the crowd, "I want to make something clear. My recovery was not a miracle of medicine or money. It was a result of compassion." He looked toward Lila. She believed I was more than a patient, more than a name on a stock certificate. Because of her, I learned that leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility. The crowd murmured, some surprised, some moved. Margaret lowered her eyes, her expression unreadable. Ethan continued, "Today, the Rose Foundation will change its focus. From profit-driven philanthropy to people-first healing. We will open community programs and expand art therapy research led by my wife, Lila Rose." Applause filled the room soft at first, then rising until it echoed through the hall. Lila's eyes glistened as Ethan leaned closer. "You see," he whispered, "it was never just about waking up. It was about what we do once we are awake." Later that evening, after the event, the two of them returned to the garden where he had proposed. The snow had melted, leaving soft earth beneath their feet. Ethan reached for her hand. "I keep thinking about that first day," he said quietly. "You stood in a cold hospital room and chose kindness instead of fear. You did not even know me, and yet you stayed." Lila smiled. "Maybe I did not stay for you. Maybe I stayed for the person you could become." He laughed gently. "Either way, it saved me." They sat together beneath the string lights that now lined the garden, their reflections flickering in the pond. For a long time, neither spoke. The air carried only the sound of waves and distant wind. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded paper. It was the original contract, the one that had started it all. "I kept this," he said, "but I do not want it to define us anymore." She unfolded it carefully. Her old signature stared back at her like a ghost from another life. Without hesitation, Ethan tore it down the middle and let the pieces fall into the pond. The paper drifted away, dissolving in the water under the pale moonlight. Lila watched, silently, tears gathering in her eyes. "That was our last tie to the past," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Now we can begin again. No conditions, no deadlines, just choice." He brushed a lock of hair from her face and said, "I owe you everything, Lila, but most of all, I owe you my heart." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then do not owe me, just live with me. That is enough." As the lights shimmered above them, the camera of the world faded away. There were no contracts left, no reporters, no expectations, only two people who had found their way through pain into something genuine. For the first time, their love was not an obligation or a miracle, it was simply real. Spring arrived quietly on the Long Island coast. The Hamptons mansion, once silent and sterile, now carried the sound of piano notes and laughter drifting through open windows. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. Every morning, Ethan played a few scales on the old family piano as part of his therapy. His fingers were still stiff, but Lila sat beside him counting softly. "Slow down," she would say, guiding his rhythm. "It is not about speed. It is about connection." He looked at her and smiled. "You always turn everything into art. And you always make everything into a challenge," she teased. They both laughed. It was an easy sound, something they were still learning to trust. Outside, the newly founded Open Hands community program was preparing for its first public event hosted by the Rose Foundation. The goal was simple: to provide art therapy for patients, veterans, and families struggling with loss. It was Lila's vision, and Ethan had insisted on funding it completely. On the morning of the launch, the hospital courtyard was transformed into a garden of colors, paintbrushes, easels, and music filling the air. Dr. Harris stood near the podium beaming. "You have started something rare," he told Lila. "Compassion as leadership. Not many corporations do that." "It is not a corporation anymore," Lila said, with a smile. "It is a promise." When Ethan joined her on stage, the crowd rose to its feet. "We call this program Open Hands," he said into the microphone, his voice clear and steady. "Because healing begins when someone reaches out first. I would not be standing here if someone had not done that for me." He looked toward Lila, his expression softening. "She taught me that the strongest act of love is not grand or loud, it is consistent. It shows up every single day, even when no one sees." The applause was long and heartfelt. Lila blinked back tears, then reached for his hand. "You see," she whispered, "you learn faster than you thought." That evening, after the guests had left, they walked through the courtyard alone. The sky was painted with the last streaks of sunset, and the smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. Ethan stopped beside one of the canvases, a child's messy swirl of blues and yellows. "It is beautiful," he said. Lila smiled. "Because it is imperfect. That is what makes it real." He turned to her, his tone softer now. "You gave me back more than my life, Lila. You gave me purpose." She looked up at him. "And you gave me proof that love can survive anything." For a long moment, they stood there in silence. The fountain nearby reflected the warm glow of lights from the windows. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know we already promised forever, he said, but I want to make it official without contracts, without conditions. Lila's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band engraved with the words, "Love is care you choose." He slipped it onto her finger as she whispered, "Then I choose it every day." He smiled. "So do I." The sound of waves carried across the night, soft and endless. Inside the mansion, the piano began to play again, this time not as therapy but as music born from gratitude. And as the final notes faded into the spring air, it became clear that their story had come full circle. What had begun as an arrangement had turned into something far greater, a love that did not need miracles to exist, only courage, patience, and two open hands willing to hold on. Months later, the Rose Foundation hosted its first anniversary of the Open Hands program. The event was smaller than the gala from a year ago, but warmer, filled with faces of people whose lives had quietly changed. Paintings by children, veterans, and families lined the walls, each marked with a single heartbeat drawn in the corner, a symbol Lila had created for hope. Ethan stood at the front, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "A year ago, I woke up in a hospital bed to a world I did not recognize. Today, I wake up every morning to a life I am proud to live. This program is not about me. It is about everyone who chooses kindness, even when it costs them something." The audience clapped softly, some wiping away tears. Lila joined him on stage, holding her sketchbook against her chest. She looked around the room, her heart full. "When I began drawing in that hospital room, I never imagined it would bring me here. But I learned that healing is never just about recovery. It is about what we build afterward together." Ethan reached for her hand and smiled. "And together, we're just getting started." The lights dimmed slightly as the music began the same gentle piano melody that had once echoed through a hospital room. The crowd watched as the couple danced slowly, the sound of applause blending with the rhythm of the song. In that moment, there were no contracts, no titles, and no cameras. Only love, steady and alive, written in the quiet language of two people who had already chosen each other long before the world noticed. Later that night, the mansion was quiet again. The celebration had ended and the guests had gone home. Only the soft hum of the sea breeze moved through the open windows. In the study, Lila sat at her desk with her sketchbook open to its final page. A candle flickered beside her, its flame steady and golden. Ethan entered quietly carrying 2 cups of tea. "You are still working?" he asked. She smiled. "Just finishing something." He looked over her shoulder and saw the words written beneath a faint pencil drawing of 2 hands intertwined. "Love is care you choose even when no one is watching." Ethan traced the sentence gently with his finger. "That was what you told me the day I woke up." "It still feels true," she said. He set the cups down and leaned against the desk. "Then let us make it our promise. Not a contract this time, but a real one." Lila closed the sketchbook and nodded. "A promise it is." They stepped outside into the garden. The night was calm, the air carrying the soft scent of blooming jasmine. The fountain glimmered under the moonlight, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of the piano drifted through the open doors. Ethan turned to her, his voice quiet but certain. "If someone had told me that the woman who saved my life would also teach me how to live it, I would not have believed them." Lila smiled, slipping her hand into his. "You just needed to wake up to see it." They walked together down the path toward the water, leaving behind the house that once felt like a cage but now stood as a home. The waves whispered against the shore, steady and endless, like the rhythm of a heart finally at peace. Their story had begun with a contract, but it ended with choice too. People who found love not through fate or wealth, but through the simple, extraordinary act of staying.